There are people who will tell you that getting older means getting wiser about danger. That experience teaches you to read a room, read a person, read the space between what someone says and what they mean. Maybe that's true for some kinds of danger, the kind that announces itself, the kind with a raised voice, or a slammed door, or a letter from a lawyer. But there's another kind that I never learned to see coming. The kind that shows up on a Sunday afternoon with a casserole dish and a warm smile, and asks if you need anything from the store. My name is Everett. I am 67 years old, and I live in Greensboro, North Carolina, in a house I bought with my wife Lorraine the year our son started kindergarten. Lorraine passed 3 years ago. Heart failure. Though I've always thought that was too simple a name for something so complicated. She was the kind of woman who kept lists of everything. Grocery lists, birthday lists of things we needed to fix around the house. After she died, I found a list she'd made called Everett's Good Qualities. It had 11 items on it. I've kept it in my wallet ever since. The house is a 3-bedroom on a quiet street in Irving Park. The kind of neighborhood where people still wave from their driveways. I worked 28 years as a civil engineer for the county, mostly roads and drainage infrastructure. Not glamorous work, but the kind of work that matters when it rains. I took early retirement at 62 because the knees told me to. The pension is steady. The house is paid off. I'm not wealthy by any measure, but I'm solid. I built that solidness deliberately over 4 decades, and I knew exactly what I had. My son Reginald is 39. He lives in Raleigh with his wife Tanya and their 2 kids, my grandchildren, who are 9 and 6, and the best part of my week when I see them. Reginald is in pharmaceutical sales. He's good at it. He has the kind of energy that fills a room without being loud about it. He's always been like that, even as a boy. Tanya is 37. She grew up in Charlotte, works remotely as an operations manager for a logistics company. She's organized the way some people are organized, not as a skill, but as a personality. Every time they visit, she notices things that need attending to in the house. A cork line that's gone gray. A cabinet hinge that's loose. She says it as helpfulness. I took it as helpfulness for a long time. They started coming more frequently after Lorraine passed. Once a month, then twice. Reginald said it was because he worried about me being alone out here. I didn't argue. After you lose someone, you learn to receive concern even when you don't feel like you need it, because the people offering it need to offer it. That's not nothing. The tablet came in January. It was a birthday gift. From both of them, they said, though Tanya was the one who set it up and the one who explained how it worked. Brand new, top of the line, in a case that matched the color of my kitchen. She said it was so. I could video call the grandkids more easily, said the screen was bigger than my phone and better for my eyes. She spent about an hour setting it up at the kitchen table, creating accounts, adjusting settings, showing me where everything was. She was patient and thorough, and at no point did anything seem wrong. I used it every day for 2 months. Video calls with the grandkids on Thursday evenings, the news in the morning. A weather app I grew fond of. I even started reading books on it, which I hadn't expected to enjoy. Wendell is the one who changed that. Wendell Okafor and I go back to 1989. We met on a county infrastructure project when he was an auditor, and I was 3 years into my engineering career. He's 70 now. Retired from 32 years as a financial examiner with the state of North Carolina. He's seen more creative accounting than he can remember and has a mind that still runs like a machine when it comes to patterns in numbers. We meet for lunch on the 2nd Tuesday of every month at a barbecue place on Battleground Avenue, the kind of restaurant where the iced tea comes unsweetened and you have to ask, which Wendell always forgets, and I always find funny. He's been widowed longer than I have. He knows which silences to fill and which ones to leave alone. I'd mentioned the tablet a few times. He asked to look at it during lunch one afternoon in March. Not in an urgent way, more curious. He asked who had set it up. I told him. He asked if Tanya still had the sign-in information from when she configured it. I said probably. She'd been the one to create the accounts. He looked at me the way he looks at a balance sheet when something doesn't line up. Not alarmed. Just still. He said, "Can I bring someone to look at this?" I asked him what someone. He said his nephew worked in cybersecurity for a firm in Durham. He'd just like him to take a look. He said it the way you say something when you already have a reasonable suspicion, but you want to be sure before you say it out loud. 3 days later, Wendell's nephew, a quiet young man named Felix who wore a company badge even on his day off, sat at my kitchen table with the tablet in front of him and a laptop open beside it. He didn't say much while he worked. That itself told me something. After about 45 minutes, he turned the laptop toward me. He pulled up a screen I didn't understand and pointed to a column of entries. He said, "This is your screen activity log. Every time you open an app, type something, navigate somewhere, there's a record." He paused. "This log isn't only saving locally. There's a mirroring application installed in the background. It forwards this data to an external account on a schedule." He showed me the account address. It wasn't mine. It contained Tanya's name. I sat back in the chair. Felix said the app was sophisticated enough that it wasn't visible in the standard applications list. You'd have to know what you were looking for. He said it captured screen content, including anything typed, any accounts accessed, any documents opened. He said whoever installed it had administrator credentials for the device, which meant they had set it up intentionally before it was given to me. I thanked him. My voice was even. I don't know how. That night I sat in the living room with the lights off for a long time, not thinking in any organized way. Just sitting. The tablet was on the coffee table where it always was, dark screen, the grandkid's photo as the wallpaper I'd set myself. I looked at it for a while. Then I called Wendell. He listened without interrupting, which is what he always does. When I finished, he asked me one question. He said, "Evada, has Tanya ever asked you about the house directly, about your accounts or your planning?" I thought about it. There had been a conversation at Thanksgiving about estate planning. General and casual. Tanya had mentioned that a lot of families wait too long to get organized, that it causes problems later. She'd mentioned a financial advisor she trusted. She'd offered to connect me. I'd said I'd think about it. I hadn't thought much about it after that. Wendell said, "Don't touch anything on that tablet. Don't change your passwords yet. And don't say anything to either of them." I said, "What are they looking for, do you think?" He said, "I don't know yet, but someone who wants to know your account balances, your login information, what documents you're looking at. That someone has a purpose. We just don't have the whole picture yet." He told me to meet him Thursday. At his place this time, not the restaurant. I went back into the living room and looked at the tablet again. Then I picked it up and carried on as normal. I watched the weather and went to bed. Thursday at Wendell's house, he had already printed things out. Wendell still prints everything. He says paper doesn't get hacked. He had called a contact at the State Banking Commission, someone he'd worked with years ago, and described the situation in general terms. He had a name for me, Constance Bird, an attorney in Greensboro who handled elder law and financial exploitation cases. He'd already spoken with her. He said, "You have an appointment tomorrow at 10. That's the kind of friend Wendell is. Constance Bird's office was on Green Street, second floor of a building that used to be a textile showroom. She was in her late 50s, wore reading glasses on a chain, and took notes in a steno pad while I talked. She didn't rush me. When I finished, she looked over her notes for a moment. She said, "I want to be direct with you. What you've described is consistent with a pattern I see with some frequency in my practice. It usually begins with access, getting into someone's financial and personal data, and it progresses from there. It can move toward fraudulent account changes, identity-based applications, or in some cases building a case toward guardianship or conservatorship under the argument that someone can no longer manage their own affairs. She said that last part carefully, watching my face. I said, "You mean someone trying to get legal control over me?" She said, "It's one of the more common end goals in financial elder exploitation cases, yes. The device access you're describing would be very useful for building that kind of case. Bank balances, medical searches, anything that could be used to argue that someone isn't managing well on their own." She told me not to change anything outwardly, not to confront anyone, to continue using the tablet as I normally would, but to be thoughtful about what I accessed on it. She told me to document everything I could remember about the conversation at Thanksgiving, about any other conversations that had touched on finances or my health, about any paperwork I'd been asked to look at or sign. She said, "I'd also like you to do something uncomfortable. I'd like you to go through the guest room, the office space, any area where Tanya or your son might have stored things during visits. Do it carefully. Don't disturb anything. Just look." I asked her why. She said, "Because people who are building a case usually have paperwork somewhere." I drove home slowly. The Bradford pear trees on my street were blooming, which they do every February in a way that Lorraine used to love, and I used to find excessive. Now I just find them familiar. I waited 2 days. Then, on a Saturday morning, while I was supposed to be at the hardware store, I came back early and went through the house the way Constance had asked. The guest room had a small writing desk in the corner, the one Tanya used when she worked remotely during visits. Third drawer, underneath a printed-out packing list from their last visit, and a charging cable that didn't belong to anything I owned. There was a manila envelope. My name was written on it in Tanya's handwriting. I stood there for a long time before I opened it. Inside were printed pages. Some were financial in nature. A property value estimate for my house that I had never requested. A summary of what appeared to be my checking and savings balances that was accurate to within the last 30 days. A printout of a retirement account statement I had opened on the tablet 6 weeks ago. She had the numbers. She had been collecting them. Below those was something else. A draft document. Legal template language. It began with my name and Reginald's name. It described a durable power of attorney and a request for appointment as financial representative. Below that, on yellow notepad paper, were handwritten observations. Tanya's handwriting. Dad asked me twice how to pay the cable bill online. Seemed frustrated and embarrassed about it. Dad couldn't find his blood pressure prescription. Searched the kitchen for 10 minutes. Eventually, in the bathroom cabinet, Dad made a comment about calling Lorraine to ask her opinion about the car. Seemed confused when we pointed out she had passed. I sat down on the edge of the guest bed and read that last line twice. I had made that comment. I remembered it. We had been talking about whether I should trade in my truck, and I had said, half to myself, that I wished I could ask Lorraine what she thought. Not because I was confused, because I missed her. Because in 38 years of marriage there was no decision we made without talking it through first, and the habit of wanting her opinion hadn't left me just because she had. That is grief, not confusion. And Tanya had written it down like evidence. I put the envelope back exactly as I found it. I went to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a while. Then I called Constance. She said, "That's what we needed." She told me to photograph every page before returning it and to send her the images immediately. She said not to let on, not to change my schedule, not to do anything that would signal a shift. She said the worst thing at this point would be to move too quickly. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life, which is a significant statement for a man who has had some strange years. I went about my routines in my own house while knowing that audio and screen data were being collected. I had conversations on the phone that I knew were probably being monitored through the tablet on the coffee table. I mentioned things out loud. Not dramatic things. Small, plausible things. I said once, standing in the hallway, that I'd missed my blood pressure appointment last month and needed to reschedule. I said another time during a phone call with a neighbor that I'd had trouble remembering where I'd put my insurance cards. Ordinary confusion that an ordinary person might have, said within range of the device, documented in my own log afterward with Wendell. Reginald called more often during this period. He asked how I was sleeping. He asked if I'd given any more thought to the financial advisor Tanya had mentioned. He asked, gently, whether I'd thought about what the house would require over the next few years, whether it was getting to be a lot to manage alone. His tone was concerned. It probably was concerned, at least in part. I don't think Reginald is a cruel man. I think he is a man who trusted his wife and let himself be led somewhere he didn't fully examine. Tanya texted separately to say she'd found a workshop on estate planning at a local senior center. She sent me the link. She said it might be useful. Constance said, "That's their timeline moving." She filed a formal report with the North Carolina Adult Protective Services Division and coordinated with a contact at the Guilford County Sheriff's Office. She told me that the mirroring application on the tablet constituted unauthorized access under North Carolina computer statutes. She said the draft conservatorship documents, combined with the financial records obtained without authorization, gave investigators what they needed to open a formal inquiry. The meeting was set for a Wednesday morning in April at Constance's office. It was framed to Reginald and Tanya as a family estate planning session that I had arranged, which was true enough not to feel entirely like a lie. I want to tell you what it was like to drive downtown that morning, knowing what the morning held. It was a clear day. The kind of April morning that feels like an argument for staying alive. The light coming through the trees on Elm Street at an angle that made everything look like it was being lit from inside. My hands were on the wheel, and they were steady. I had thought they might not be, but I had had weeks to arrive at this moment, weeks of watching and waiting and performing the role of a man more uncertain than he was, and what I felt driving to that office was not anger and not fear. It was something closer to resolution, like arriving at a load-bearing problem you finally worked out the math on. They were already in the conference room when I arrived. Reginald had come straight from Raleigh. He stood up when I walked in and hugged me, which made something in my chest do a complicated thing. Tanya smiled, comfortable. They thought they knew what this meeting was. Constance introduced herself and the other two people in the room. One was a detective from the Guilford County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Unit. The other was a representative from the State Banking Commission's Elder Financial Exploitation Division. She introduced them by name and title plainly, without drama. Tanya's expression changed when she heard the words Financial Crimes Unit. Constance laid out the situation methodically. The mirroring application, the account data recovered, the unauthorized property appraisal, the draft legal documents found in my guest room, the notes, including the note about Lorraine. Tanya said, "That's not what those notes are." I was worried about him. I was documenting because I was trying to help. The detective said, "The application on the device was installed before it was given to Mr. Everett. That's not worry. That's intent." Reginald hadn't said anything. He was looking at the table. Then he looked at Tanya. He said, "Tanya." Just her name. The same way a door closes on something. She said the notes were out of context. She said the financial information she'd gathered was only to help with planning, that she had intended to sit down with me and go through everything together. She said she loved me and that none of this was what it looked like. Constance placed a single printed page on the table. It was an email from Tanya to a law office in Charlotte, dated 6 weeks prior. I won't repeat it word for word, but the substance was clear. She had been consulting with an attorney about the timeline for establishing financial guardianship, describing it as a situation where the subject is unlikely to contest if approached correctly. The subject. That was the word she had used. For me, Reginald put his face in his hands. Tanya said, "That's completely misrepresenting what I was asking." The detective said, "We'll have the opportunity to clarify that as the investigation proceeds." There was no arrest that morning. These things don't always work that way, and Constance had explained that to me beforehand. But the formal investigation was opened, the device was taken into evidence, and Tanya was advised by the detective to retain her own attorney. She and Reginald left separately from the parking lot. I saw that through the window from the second floor. They had driven together and they left in the same car, but something about the way they moved in the parking lot told me the car ride home was not going to be what they had expected their morning to be. Constance asked if I was all right. I told her I was, which was mostly true. I changed every password and account credential within the following week. I worked with Constance to update my estate documents, assigning a professional fiduciary as the successor trustee rather than a family member, and adding specific protections that I should have had in place years ago and hadn't, because I had assumed that the people closest to me were the people most trustworthy with what I'd built. That assumption had been wrong, or at least it had been used against me, which amounts to the same thing in practice. Reginald called me 3 weeks later. He said he hadn't known about the email. He said he hadn't known about the application on the tablet, that Tanya had told him it was just a parental control feature she was repurposing to make sure the setup was stable. He said he had believed her. He said that out loud, and I could hear how much it cost him. I said, "I believe you didn't know." He said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say." I told him that was enough for right now, that some things take longer than a phone call to work through. He understood. We're still working through it. We talk on Sundays, which is new. It's slow and it's not easy, and some Sundays the call is only 10 minutes. And that's fine. You can't schedule the repair of something like this. You just keep showing up. Wendell came over for dinner a few weeks after the meeting. I made the brisket that Lorraine used to make, which I have only gotten approximately right in 3 years of trying, and which Wendell called excellent, which is the kind of thing a good friend says. We ate at the dining room table, which I have been using more lately. It used to feel too large for one person. It's starting to feel like just a table. He said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said, "Tell me." He said, "She picked the right gift. Something you'd use every day. Something that would feel useful. She thought it through." He shook his head. "That's what gets me. The effort." I'd thought about that too. The case that matched the color of my kitchen. The patience in showing me how it worked. The hour she spent at this table, setting it up while I made coffee. All of it considered. All of it designed. There is a particular kind of sorrow that comes not from being hurt by someone, but from realizing how long and how carefully they had to plan to do it. That the version of them you knew and trusted was an architecture, not a person. That's a different loss than most people know how to name. The tablet is gone. I keep a simple phone now, and I set it up myself, and no one else has the sign-in. I have good habits around my accounts which Wendell helped me build, and a file folder of physical documents that I keep in a locked cabinet in the office. Old-fashioned, some people would say. I would say reliable. Here is what I will leave you with, because after a story like this, I think the direct version is what you deserve. I spent 28 years building infrastructure that people drive on and don't think about. Roads, drainage channels, culverts under highways. The work of keeping systems intact so that ordinary life can happen without interruption. That is what I believed I had built for myself in retirement too. A solid structure. Paid off, documented, understood. What I learned is that solid structures can be mapped and measured by people who intend to take them. and that the most effective way to approach a solid structure is not to attack it directly, but to get close to it, to be trusted, to be handed access voluntarily, as a gift, with a birthday candle on top and a grandchild's name in the login screen. If someone in your life is paying close attention to how you manage your money, your health, your schedule, not in the way that people who love you pay attention, but in the way that people building documentation pay attention, trust that feeling. Write down what you observe. Don't confront anyone yet. Call a lawyer who handles elder law before you call anyone else. And if someone offers to help you get organized, take all the time you need. Real help doesn't require your account passwords. Real concern doesn't take notes you weren't shown. Real love does not need access to what you have. It already has what it needs. I still think about the case Tanya picked out for that tablet, the one that matched the color of my kitchen. That detailer stayed with me longer than most of it, because it means she stood in a store or scrolled through a website and thought about my kitchen, thought about what would blend in, what would look like it belonged there. And then she bought a device she had already decided to use against me and wrapped it in something that felt personal. That's not impulsive. That's patient. And patience in the wrong direction is one of the most dangerous things one person can aim at another. What stopped it wasn't luck. I want to be clear about that. Wendell noticed something because Wendell has spent a lifetime training himself to notice things. 32 years of reading financial records teaches you to see patterns where other people see routine. He didn't panic when I showed him that tablet. He asked the right question first. That's what good judgment looks like. Not a reaction, but a method. I've thought many times about what would have happened if I hadn't mentioned the tablet to him over lunch that Tuesday. If I'd kept it to myself, the way proud people sometimes do, not wanting to seem like they can't manage. I might have managed my way right out of everything I spent 4 decades building. There's something I've come to understand about what Tanya was counting on. She was counting on my decency, my willingness to believe that people who say they care about me actually mean it, my reluctance to look too closely at a gift from someone in my own family. Those are not weaknesses I'm embarrassed about, but I understand now that they are the exact places where a certain kind of person looks for an opening, the character I've tried to live by. Treating people as trustworthy until proven otherwise, giving the benefit of the doubt, not making accusations without cause. That character was being used as a tool, and recognizing that didn't make me cynical, it made me careful. There's a difference. What I had to find in those weeks of waiting and watching was a kind of steadiness I didn't know I still had. Standing in my own hallway saying things out loud for a device I knew was recording me. Sitting across from my son at dinner and keeping my face neutral. Driving to Constance's office knowing what was coming and keeping my hands on the wheel. That kind of endurance. The quiet kind. The kind nobody sees. That's what protected what I'd built. Not anger. Not confrontation. Just the discipline to wait until the math was finished before I showed my work. Reginald is still my son. That part doesn't change. We talk on Sundays now, and some of those calls are better than others. And I've stopped expecting them to be easy before they're ready to be What Tanya did, she did. She did. What Reginald allowed by not looking closely enough, he has to live with. What I did in those weeks when I knew and said nothing and documented everything, I did that right, and that matters to me. Not because I need to be right, because when you are 67 years old, and you have buried your wife and raised a son, and spent 28 years building things meant to last, the least you can do for yourself is protect what remains. With honesty, with clarity, and without apology. Lorraine's list is still in my wallet. I read it sometimes when the quiet gets heavy. 11 things. Number 4 is, knows when to hold on and when to let go. I'm still working on that one.